even when we fight back. Unfortunately, I learned saying no emphatically and physically resisting doesn't always help either. I had gone on an amazing 2-week bus tour of Europe with my grandmother. I was flying back to China, where I was studying Mandarin at Xiamen University. My grandmother had gone ahead, and I had stayed overnight at a community home in London to take a flight out the next day. After dinner, I was being a good girl, helping with the dishes. As I was sweeping the floor, some of the young men living there were making fun of me. A visitor to the home and longtime friend of theirs told them to shut up. I liked that he defended me. He was very handsome with long golden curls and a face like Apollo. I was sleeping in the guest room of this big house, and he decided to stay over with the approval of his friends. He told me that he often stayed the night and asked, "Is it okay if I share the guest room with you?" It was not my home, so who was I to say no? But I said we would have to separate the double bed into 2 single beds. They had been pushed together. He helped me separate the beds, and I chatted and flirted innocently as we worked. After we'd gone to bed in our separate singles, he kept wanting to talk late into the night. "It's late. I have to go to sleep," I finally say. "Of course. Can you just give me a good night hug?" "Sure," I shrug. We are an affectionate group of people who hugged all the time. I get up and go to hug him, and he pulls me onto the bed and underneath him. I think he's trying to be cute, so I laugh and let him cuddle me for a few minutes, then say, "Okay, now I really need to go to bed." But he's not letting me go. "You're not going anywhere. I know you want this as much as I do." "No, I don't," I say. "I do find you attractive, but I'm not going to have sex with you. It's against the rules," which I know he knows. And I don't want to get into trouble. No one will know. I'll know. I'm serious. Get off me. I shove him as hard as I can, but I can't budge him an inch. I think, I'm strong. I've wrestled with my brothers all my life. I can get out of this. I try every trick I know, twisting my body, using my legs, the strongest part of me, to try to push him off. I try to fake him out, but he's holding my wrists down and using the rest of his body to hold my legs. I physically struggle to escape for well over an hour. I use logic and explanations. I emphatically declare, I am not ambiguous about this. I absolutely don't want to have sex with you. I'm not being coy or playing hard to get. This is a definite no. He doesn't budge. Finally, exhausted and angry and accepting that I'm helpless against far superior physical strength, I let him do it and get it over with. I am so frustrated and angry. Even when I didn't freeze, when I wasn't submitting to an elder, when I could and did verbalize a definite no and I fought back physically, I still couldn't prevent the violation. When I come back from washing up in the bathroom, he's sound asleep. I curl into a ball on my bed and wait for morning. I leave without saying anything to anyone. What's the point? Later, I ask myself, why didn't I scream the house down? Fear and embarrassment. Fear that I would get into more trouble if I was caught in bed with him and it had to be reported to the elders. Fear that people in the house would take his side and not believe me, because they were his friends. I didn't know anyone there. Embarrassment to scream and cause a big scene. Humiliation that they would think it was my own fault and that I would be gossiped about. I was on my own. I could not trust them to take my side to protect me. The humiliation, the feeling that this was somehow my fault and that I would get blamed for it if I called for help, kept me fighting in silence. Rape is the most underreported crime. It is a crime that women are taught to be so ashamed of and afraid to admit. Many women report being as traumatized by reporting it to the police and the following court battle as they were by the rape. So it's not surprising that at least 63% of sexual assaults are not reported to the police. I suspect the actual number is much, much higher. Studies show that more than 90% of sexual assault victims on college campuses do not report the assault, and only 12% of child sexual abuse is ever reported to the authorities. 88% goes unreported. These statistics amount to millions of women and children abused and crying silently in the dark, afraid to speak. How many more violations will it take for us to act? Must it happen to your daughter, to your sister, to your wife, or your mother before we create a concerted effort to teach all men, women, and children these fundamental principles and boundaries inherent in the right to ownership in our own body? Most of the women I know have experienced rape or sexual assault. None of us reported it to the authorities. Most kept it hidden from everyone, even their closest friends and family, for years. For 20 years, I buried these and other stories in a deep well of silence. I didn't talk about them with my best friends or my family. Why? What good would it do? They would only feel hurt for me. I didn't want their pity or the embarrassment. I still don't. So why would I talk about these experiences with you? As I finally began to reveal to my closest girlfriends these experiences from my past, I started to hear one story after another. It seems that almost every one of my girlfriends, who grew up in very different parts of society, a typical white middle-class family in England, an immigrant family in New York, a church-going white middle-class family in Maine, all had experienced sexual assault, some as children, others as adults. Though they also never spoke about it, it had deeply impacted each of their lives. That is when I realized that sexual abuse of women is not relegated to isolated religious or ethnic groups. It cuts across the broad swath of humanity, racial, religious, and socioeconomic status, and into almost every household. I was not special. We were all experiencing violations of one type or another. Too many of them extreme violations. Lisa. A dear friend of mine, Lisa, grew up in a loving but strict white middle-class family. She is a talented visual artist. She is the embodiment of femininity, beautiful with large, kind eyes, long golden hair, soft-spoken, keenly aware of others and how they are feeling, always wanting to help humanity and do good. And so gentle, she actually won't hurt a fly, but prefers to shoo it out of the room. Her kind nature led her to work for a spiritual teacher as his assistant and photographer. She worked tirelessly for over a year with him as a true fan and believer. One day she fell sick with the flu and was laid up in bed. Her leader and idol came into her room to check on her. But instead of leaving, he climbed into bed on top of her. Sick and disoriented, she lay frozen in total shock as her guru and mentor proceeded to insert himself and violate her body. She had no ability in her to say anything or even move. Despite being physically incapacitated with fever, she was in shock at the violation. When she recovered from her illness, she eventually did tell her family, and they confronted the guru, who seemed to think that he was honoring her and claimed that she wanted it. She has never been the same. It destroyed her faith in what she believed in and the mission she had devoted herself to by helping him. It destroyed her view of herself, of her own judgment, and in the enjoyment of her own body. She has had a long road back fighting the demons of depression, worthlessness, and distrust of herself. But it was never her fault. Someone violated her property without her permission. Silence is not permission. Let me say that again. Silence is not permission. The only reason I'm telling you these stories now is because I saw that when I spoke to my closest girlfriends about what happened to me, it created a safe space for them to tell their stories, to validate their emotions. I could be a voice to say, you are not alone. I understand. I've been there and I've come through. I haven't just buried it. I've faced it and healed, and you can too. In Chapter 5, I share the tools that I use to confront and process these traumatic experiences in a safe way, to understand the impact they've had on my life, and to heal the consequential behaviors that are triggered by such experiences. Sexual child abuse. Heather, a friend of mine from a normal middle-class home in Europe, was molested by her grandfather when she was 5 years old. To deal with her own trauma, she became a psychotherapist. Regina, another powerhouse friend of mine in New York, was sexually molested by a family friend at 6 years old. An Asian American friend of mine in California was molested for years by her uncle from the time she was a preteen. These sexual violations are happening everywhere and all the time. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18 years old. 30% of female rape victims are girls between the ages of 11 and 17 at the time of their first completed rape. 12% of women were ages 10 or younger at the time of their first completed rape. And there is a diagram from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center of these statistics. Nearly 80% of women who experience a completed rape were violated as young, vulnerable women under the age of 25. That is approximately 17,600,000 women right now. Nearly half, 42%, were raped as minors and children under 18. That is over 9 million young girls in America, 9 million children who are raped. How is it possible that this is not the biggest news in the country? I grew up in a religious commune formed by young adults of the late 1960s era of idealistic hippie dropouts, free love, political radicalism, sex, and rock and roll. As these young people matured and married, the commune's daily routine included a lot of preaching the gospel to outsiders, fundraising, work around the home, teaching school to the children, and one of my father's passions, raising horses and other farm animals. Like a kibbutz, children were put into groups by age and cared for by 1 or 2 caregivers per group. This freed the parents to do other work for the community. All adults were called auntie and uncle to emphasize that we were all a family and that everything was shared. Indeed, the group's guru promoted the concept of Christian communism, that no one had a right to personal possessions, but that everything belonged to the group, including the members' bodies and children. All members were instructed by the group's guru that children should be raised with the belief and example that sex is a normal, healthy part of life and nothing to be ashamed of, so that we would feel good about ourselves and our bodies and engage in sex without hang-ups. Within this seemingly idyllic frame, as a child, it was not uncommon to hear about sex or see adults walking around indoors, scantily clad or even naked. When I was 5 years old, my best friend, a boy 1 year younger than me, and I would spend nap time. He would spend nap time with me, and we would play doctor, examining each other's thingies or private parts. All well and good. I only have amusing memories of our embarrassment and curiosity. But that controlling environment that asserted ownership over the members, at the same time as encouraging permissive sexual behavior, opened the door for much worse. As some adults interacted sexually with the children and teenagers, the so-called naturalness of our upbringing was twisted into abuse. When I was a little girl, I craved attention from the uncles in our community. I liked to sit on their laps. They felt solid and secure. I feared my dad because he could lash out at any minute, and I was never quite sure what would set him off. I especially liked one of the uncles named John. He was tall and handsome and did a lot of the construction work on our farm. One evening, he offered to babysit me. I was pleased. I felt warm and comfortable in his arms. Uncle John took me to his room and laid me on the bed beside him. Afterwards, I was so confused. I had heard my parents and teachers talk about our bodies as good and natural and how babies are made. So I wondered, why do I feel so awful? I was so embarrassed and ashamed that I never spoke about it to anyone. I just ducked my head noncommittally and hurried away. I thought it was all my fault because I had agreed to go with him to his room because he was babysitting me. After that, I became more reserved around adult men. I watched them carefully for signs that they might want me to do that again, and I avoided being alone with one. It didn't always work, though. Developmental specialists well understand the drive to please, and that young women and even children will engage in sexual behavior with adults in an effort to please. We are biologically programmed to please our caregivers and adults, as we fully feel on a fundamental level that these people have the power of life and death over us. And they do when we are children. Our biological and psychological adaptation is to have an almost overwhelming desire to please people in authority, which is anyone stronger. So for instance, in the case of an adult with a child. So a child can appear to engage willingly in sexual activities. As children grow into teens, they grow out of this compelling need to please adults and transfer that to their peer group, unless that growth was stunted somehow. As a child, I did not feel I could say no. My entire training had been conditioned to obedience through teaching, lectures, and violence by being spanked. This was compounded by my subconscious biological need to please adults as necessary for survival. If an adult invited my 6-year-old self to do something and treated me kindly with smiles and praise, I was going to go along with it to the best of my ability. After that experience, try as I might to never be alone with an adult man, it didn't always work. Several years later, I was a precocious 10-year-old with the body of a kid, but the attitude of a 15-year-old. Uncle P, the father of a good friend of mine, came to stay with us for a few months. He was a tall, dark, handsome man with a rock star on the guitar. We all loved to have sing-alongs with him. One hot summer day, he stops me as I'm walking through the kitchen and calls me over, and I don't think twice. He takes me by the shoulders and bends down so that we're eye level. I expect an inspirational pep talk or a correction, but he kisses me on the mouth. Now, ours is an affectionate family. Hugs and kisses are the norm, but a kiss on the mouth is different. I pull back, which doesn't make him happy. He calmly explains that this is a way of showing God's love. Are you going to be unyielded and unloving, or are you going to share God's love? There's nothing I can say. Of course I want to make Jesus happy. He presses his lips to mine, and I stand there like a statue. He shakes me. This is not correct. Open your mouth, he orders. I'm trapped. There is no one else around. Like a robot, I open my mouth, and he shoves his tongue inside. After moving it around like an eel, he says I can go. I run outside so fast I lose one of my flip-flops, and the hot concrete path outside burns my foot. I wash my mouth over and over to get rid of the taste. After that, I walk around the outside of the house to avoid passing through the kitchen where he might catch me alone again. My thoughts focus on how I might be to blame. Was I too friendly? Could he tell that I liked him, that I thought he was handsome? After that, anytime an adult man shows a friendly interest in me, I ignore them with as much coldness as I can muster to make sure that I give them zero encouragement. Sticking my chin up, I look down my nose at them from my great height of 4'11". My mom doesn't understand why I act so rude to the men, and even calls me the ice queen. I still love to flirt and fool around with boys of my own age, but I will go to any lengths to avoid being caught in a situation like that with an adult man. In the years since these experiences, I've often asked myself what was wrong there. In general, my parents and all the adults were trying to raise us with a healthy attitude about sex. They were following ideas that were popularized in the 1960s. Sweden even had set the age of consent for sex at 12 years old. I don't think it's that anymore, though. These ideas of sexual freedom were then justified with some far-fetched interpretations of scriptures. We were all taught about God's law of love and about sacrifice, openness, and behaving naturally. How did something that sounded so good end up with such bad effects on the children who experienced it? Child abuse can happen anywhere. Perhaps you have participated in it. You certainly know people who have. Almost all of my friends experienced some form of sexual abuse. Most of my gay male friends, even some of my straight male friends, admit to having been sexually abused as tweens. These people became my friends long before I ever breathed a word of my story, which means that many people we interact with daily have experienced abusive behavior or have engaged in abusive behavior to children. How can these violations be so pervasive? It must stem from a core belief passed down through generations that is fundamentally false that supports this behavior. If I, as a conscious being, have a full property right in my own body, When does this right arise? Is there some magic wand that creates that right when I turn 18? No. If this right is inherent in being human, then it exists from birth. A baby already has full rights in its own body. We do great harm in society by the legal fiction that parents own their children. For a child to escape this ownership, it must apply to the courts for emancipation, which sounds eerily familiar to the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves in the United States. The concept of owning human children subconsciously causes huge issues in our society. If I own something, then I can do what I want with it. It is my property. Who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do to my own children? I hear that a lot in certain circles. I stop into a P.F. Chang's for lunch with my girlfriend, Rosie. Across from us, I see a lovely family out celebrating, a mother, her 3 kids, and their grandparents. The 3-year-old girl is seated in her high chair with her grandfather next to her. His much larger body towers over her as he pokes her in the ribs, tickling her. Her small body curls in on itself, her face a picture of unhappiness. The mother notices the little girl's discomfort and says, "Stop that. Can't you see you're making her uncomfortable?" The grandfather answers, "What are you talking about? She's fine." The mother says to her little girl, "Honey, if you don't like what someone is doing to you, you can say so." With wide, pleading eyes, the small child looks at her mother and says, "Please, you tell him." The mom looks at her father reproachfully. Surly, the man responds, "She's my granddaughter. I can do what I like with her." This is the attitude we're talking about. If a baby is born with a property right in its own body, then the parent is not the owner, but a steward, a caretaker, and has a responsibility to care for the child until it is able to care for itself. This is part of the inherent contract that parents made when deciding to have a child. The parent can give the child up for adoption if they do not want to carry out the terms of the steward's contract. Instilling this new norm will clear up much fuzziness. Not all people who abuse their children are who we would consider terrible people. People beat their children, thinking that is the way to make them into good people. They touch their children sexually, excusing this as free love or teaching their kids to be comfortable with their own bodies and sex. They make their children commit sexual acts with the thought that they are somehow entitled to it. Psychologists even say that many times in the abuser's head, there is no clear distinction between the child and themselves. The child doesn't have its own personhood, but is seen as an extension of the adult. This is true in particular of one's own children, who are often seen as an extension of their parents. I believe power disparity is at the root of the harm in all of these instances of sexual abuse, because it creates undue pressure, whether explicit or subconscious, especially when it's an adult with a child, or a boss with an employee, even just a man with a woman if he is physically larger and seen by both parties as more powerful due to cultural conditioning. I have no bad memories or effects from playing doctor with other little kids, or even making out with teens my own age. There is no negative, sucking blackness in my stomach, only laughter and embarrassment. Why? I knew I had power in those situations. I could walk away at any time. As I study my own and others' experiences, I realize that every time one of us is affected negatively by a sexual interaction, even if the effect is only identified years later, there was always a disparity of power. Understand, the person who is in the higher position of power may not be aware of it or of how it changes the dynamics. This is why we must be vigilant, both in explaining to our young women and sensitizing our young men to recognize it. This is also why I fully support a complete ban on any adult with child sexual interaction. No exceptions. Whenever an adult interacts sexually with a child, as I explained above, there is an inescapable power disparity. The apparent willingness of the child is irrelevant because it is not possible to remove the power disparity between the two parties. Even if a child expresses curiosity about sex and a willingness to engage with an adult, it is a false presumption to think that justifies the act. How was that child conditioned to behave? Experienced child sex predators will prep their targets for years with mental conditioning to be ready to willingly engage in sex when they are 11 or 12 years old. It doesn't take growing up in an oddball religious commune like I did to be conditioned to accept sexual abuses as a norm. Society and popular culture are doing the work of prepping kids for sexual abusers who inhabit every layer of society. Check out this powerful and disturbing TEDx talk by Gail Dines. She did a great TEDx talk. It's called Growing Up in a Pornified Culture. Definitely watch this talk. Very important for any of you, for parents, especially important. Watch this talk. She spoke with a convicted child rapist who told her he didn't have to work that hard to groom his intended targets anymore. As, quote, he says, the culture does a lot of the grooming for me. The sexual conditioning that happens right here in American society through the internet, music videos, games, movies, and television is far more effective and pervasive sexual priming than even what I was exposed to growing up in a free love environment. If you want to teach your children to be comfortable and natural about sex, do not take it upon yourself to show them and initiate them. Let them explore and play with kids their own age. From personal experience, I was not harmed by my parents' openness about sex with each other, even though it was embarrassing. I also enjoyed playing at sex with my same age friend, where we both held equal power. However, any sexual interaction of a child with adult leaves a negative impact, even when done with the child's supposed agreement. A child's first desire is to please you and to be seen as good. They do not have the capacity to say no. You must set the boundaries and say no for them. Sexual interaction between a child and an adult will be experienced as a traumatic event, especially for girls. Any psychological pressure on a girl or woman to have sex when she doesn't want to and does not feel that she can refuse amounts to rape. The sad truth is that people who abuse others have generally been abused themselves. It's locked into their brain as a norm. But there is hope to stop this cycle of abuse if they are willing to re-examine their own experience, to question whether what they were taught is in fact true, to recognize that logically it cannot be true. There is hope if they seek help to reconnect to the emotions of terror, pain, shock, anger, betrayal, sadness, and helplessness that they experienced as a small child when they were abused. Emotions they cut themselves off from in order to survive and continue to live in that relationship with the adult on whom their life depended. Alice Miller is a renowned child psychologist. She does a great job of explaining this dynamic in her books. How can we better protect our children and young women? How can we prepare them to fight for themselves? How can we teach them resilience so they can recover from the traumas that we cannot prevent? Our first step is to teach them that they have a property right in their own body.